I'm Camila Ramos. I'm the head of developer relations at Fuel Labs, where we're building Fuel, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about what that means in a second. But really, Fuel is not the focus. The focus here is going to be for developer teams and teams building developer tooling and even consumer-facing things. What is the value proposition of building international developer communities? And we're going to do a very long journey where at the very end, we're going to get to this. But we have a lot of bases to cover to understand the why. And really the why is like 90% of this presentation. And then the how is just like the last two slides where I can give you some tips on what exactly it means to be able to implement this and build this international developer community. So next slide, please, if it works. But if not, you guys saw it earlier. It's this graph where the x-axis is the type of problem. On the left, it's a small problem. On the right, it's a big problem. And the y-axis is how many people this problem affects. So just try to imagine this. And at the top, it's very few people, and on the bottom, it's many people. So you, as someone building a tool, someone building something consumer-facing, the quadrant that you want to be in is you want to solve a big problem for a lot of people. And unfortunately, ¿pueden pasar el slide una vez, por favor? Yeah, great. Unfortunately, where we are right now in crypto and in Web3 is we're in that quadrant. We're solving a very small problem for very few people. And a great example of this is, si pasan otra vez, if you guys turn the slide one more time, it's basically like a bunch of memes about crypto where it's like to the moon and Dogecoin and like NFTs and crypto dick butts. So we all reside right now in that like small corner where we're solving. Uno más, por favor. How about this? How about I do you one better? Okay, it's not as good, but look, it's like the monkey, the Discord, I'm getting 1,000,000%, yeah, APY, like Elon Musk. We're in the bad corner right now, and like I think right now as an industry, we're trying to figure out how do we get to the other corner, right? Like how do we get to solve a big problem for many people? This is a lot harder than I anticipated without Okay, yeah, perfecto. Okay, uno más. Okay, so how do we get here? How do we get to be in that quadrant where we're solving a big problem for many people? You know, this thing has been around, this little x-axis, y-axis has been around for a long time. I learned it during my time doing product marketing at Sony, and it was kind of one of the first things that helped me frame, like, when we're building a product, how exactly should we think about it? So how do we get from this, like, lower quadrant where we're solving a small problem to this other quadrant where we're solving a big problem for many people? And really, how do we innovate to get to that point? Because right now, a lot of teams are working on a lot of dope stuff, and I deeply respect all of these teams, but as an industry, we're all trying to figure out, like, what problems can we actually solve, and what kind of new use cases can we unlock with crypto that weren't possible before? And basically in this talk, I'm going to make the case for why we need to shift our attention and our capital to other parts of the world besides Europe and the United States. And it's great that we're here in Colombia, and by a show of hands, there's really not that many Latinos here, so the onus is on us as, the global West, the people controlling the power, the people controlling the money, the people controlling the kind of like thought leadership for how to implement this so that we can get to that phase. Okay, the next slide, please. Perfect, so what does this look like? Improved UX, and we'll talk about all these points. Improved UX, scalability, and international communities building, solving for like hyper-local problems, and more importantly, more secure applications. I'm just gonna not look at that anymore. Okay, let's just talk. Just ignore the slides. So improved UX, like the Lens team's doing a good job, Biconomy's doing a good job, Mirror's doing a good job, Geo's doing a good job, where they're doing a bunch of cool things like gasless transactions, they're batching transaction signing so that users don't have to sign for every little thing. If you guys have ever used Mirror, you go through that process where it'll ask you, remember me, so that you don't have to sign every single action that you do. So there's a lot of teams moving in this direction, and specifically, I wanna highlight the stuff that we're working on over at Fuel Labs. Dos más, por favor. 2 more slides. Specifically highlight the stuff that we're doing at Fuel Labs around improved UX, which is native meta transactions, which basically makes it so that someone else can sign a transaction for you, and you could transfer an ERC 721 to a friend without ever having to sign gas. Something that's not possible on Ethereum that will be possible on Fuel. Account abstraction, another thing that Fuel has and that I'm like really excited about, and what that means is that it unlocks that coins can be locked behind user-defined spending conditions, but what that enables is that you can use any wallet. You can use an Ethereum wallet, you can use a Solana wallet, and if you guys missed it, yesterday John, the CTO of Fuel, gave a really cool talk on this, and he's gonna publish the slides shortly after, so you guys can kind of go more in depth on that technical stuff. The other improved UX that we're working on at Fuel Labs is support for multiple native assets. So in Ethereum right now, the only token you can like send with a call is ETH. And in Fuel, you'll be able to send any token. All tokens are first-class citizens. They all get the same treatment in that you can send coins with any transaction. Oh, perfect. Dos más, por favor. Okay, now let's talk about increased security. When you're dealing with a population like Latin America who are very price sensitive because the average monthly income is around $500 a month, we can't do things. Otro? Creo que dos más. We can't have like the level of security that we have now. We can't tell people like, trust this system, put your money into it, like put a big part of your money into it, whether it be $10. Like if a transaction is $10, that's still too much, because if you look at $500 as your income, that's still way too big of a portion to just spend on gas. And then if we're talking about using DeFi applications or really any application where there's money at stake, we absolutely will not be able to convert this like region if there's not a higher level of security on their money. ¿Me lo puedes pasar dos más, por favor? And what we're working on at Fuel, otro? Yeah, otro. Okay, más? Más? Y uno más. Okay, what we're working on at Fuel is we have this smart contract language called Sway, which is based on Rust, and it has a lot of cool things, and it leverages a lot of the type security that comes from Rust. And one of the cool things about writing your own programming language and having a DSL, like something specific for blockchain, is that when you write the compiler, you can make your own rules, and you can say, we want to optimize for certain things because we're dealing with a blockchain environment, an adversarial environment. One of the things that comes with that, yes, is that the Sway compiler will call out when you as a developer have a reentrancy vulnerability. So it'll tell you, it won't even let you ship this. When you try to build this, it'll say, hey, on line, I don't know, 317, you have this vulnerability that you need to address. El próximo, por favor. Another thing is that the Sway compiler forces us to handle all variants. And basically what this means is, like, if you're not handling a case, if there's a case that's unhandled, i.e. maybe like, I don't know, in the case that's false, you never actually handle the flow for what happens for a user when something returns false, it won't let you build this either. It'll say, hey, you need to handle all possible cases. La próxima, por favor. And these two things together, plus the next one I'm going to talk about, which is namespace storage access. So if you've written in Solidity, you've probably accidentally touched storage a time where you either didn't mean to or you didn't understand the kind of unintended consequences that come with accessing storage. Yes, so in Sway, si me lo pasas una vez más, por favor? In Sway, on the next slide, you'll kind of see a screenshot of the code of what this looks like, but you as a developer have to annotate every function and define what kind of access this function has to storage. That way, when you as a developer, not only you who wrote it, but other developers who are either using your library or just looking at your application, very clearly understand the access that this function has. And so it's kind of like, how can we avoid unintended consequences of accidentally accessing storage? And then kind of the security that comes with that very explicit stating of what kind of access it has. Yes, so if you see the little, it might be hard to see, but the kind of ampersand and then the square brackets storage, ooh, nice. That is the annotation that comes to define what kind of access a function has to storage. So if you see the maybe like fourth or fifth line says API counter, the line after that says storage, read, write. So we're defining you have access to read and write storage from this function, right? There could be other functions where you don't want the developer or the user to access storage, where they're maybe just doing a read, and then you would denote that in this part too. Perfect, and now on to the next point, scalability. So right now, right, we'll get to this later, but right now, like, we're nowhere near the scale that we need to capture this 666 million in Latin America, like nowhere near. And the thing that I'm going to talk about in a bit is basically like they have problems that we don't have in the West that can actually be solved and unlocked with crypto, and they just don't have, like, we just don't have the scale to support them at this rate. So we need to figure out how can we scale to this level without sacrificing decentralization? And that's one of the things that we're also working on at Fuel. And kind of what does this mean? Like, what does it mean to not sacrifice decentralization? There's other chains out there, maybe like Solana, that have very high throughput, but they're not necessarily scalable. Now, what does this mean? It means that for scalability, users have to be able to validate the chain themselves. They have to be able to run a full node on consumer hardware at home without having to buy a supercomputer. And when you kind of make that trade-off to say, I want higher throughput, but you take that away, then you kind of end up with the systems that we have now, and it kind of loses the ethos. And not only the ethos from kind of an ideological perspective, but if you're dealing with money, users need to have control over their money and their applications. And the only way to do that is to have the ability to opt in to run a full node if you want to. I had these really cool slides that basically showed kind of the throughput right now in Web 2 and kind of like the load that we're able to handle. So I'll just read it out to you. Visa's transactions per second is anywhere from 1,700 to 24,000, so they can handle up to 24,000 transactions per second. NASDAQ does 10 million trades per day, so if you do the math on that, like a bunch of transactions per second. And on Ethereum, on Ethereum right now, you can do anywhere from 15 to 30 transactions, and the max ever recorded was 116 transactions per second on Ethereum. So nowhere near the scalability that we need. Uno más, por favor. So now on to kind of like where we were going with this, right? So the case for Latin America. I'm going to talk about why I think Latin America specifically is a really good place for teams to be right now. And if they can capture this market, they're going to see a lot of usage and upside to the things that they're building in a way that you wouldn't really be able to see in North America and Europe, simply because we don't have the problems that need to be solved. Like, we have it pretty well relatively compared to everywhere else. And so let's talk about it. Uno más, por favor. So why exactly Latin America? Okay, Latin America is a really ripe case, I think, because they already exhibit behaviors that make them more keen to exploring crypto. And what are those behaviors? Mobile-first digital payments. Everywhere in Latin America runs on mobile. If you have maybe interacted with any Colombians here, everyone's using WhatsApp, everyone's using digital payments. No, rarely any people really are not using digital-first, mobile-first infrastructure in Latin America. There's high adoption of neobank applications. A lot of people are already operating outside of the kind of lanes of traditional bank financial systems. A lot of people use PayPal, Mercado Pay, PSE, PixPay. And I don't know if I see him, but there's a developer here from Brazil who kind of put me onto PixPay and the whole story about that, and I'll kind of cover that later. And then the other thing that really makes it ripe is kind of just the growing political and socioeconomic instability and the kind of rails and support that you can get from crypto in terms of safety and infrastructure for your money, because as we've seen in the last few months, when something goes awry in different countries, they can just freeze the banks, you're not allowed to pull your money out, and chaos ensues. So for people like this specifically, they're very sensitive to things like that, right? There's already distrust because of like a long, 100+ year long history of socioeconomic instability. El próximo, por favor. So the next one, it just kind of shows some stats of the adoption of online neobank and non-bank applications. Yeah, so basically it's a lot of words to say. More than 90% of people in Latin America are already using neobank. Basically, they're already operating outside of the traditional financial world, and to me that signals that they're comfortable, more comfortable potentially than other regions with adapting to crypto. And actually, people in Latin America are transacting in crypto at higher rates than other parts of the world. And at the end, I'm going to link a resource where you can kind of read all of these reports and see all the sources cited, so you can kind of see the graphs and the data yourself. El próximo, por favor. Great, so this graph kind of just asks, there's this survey by Rapid that interviewed a bunch of people in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and Venezuela, I believe, or maybe somewhere else. And basically the question that they're asking is, what kind of non-bank payment apps do you use? And the number one answer in Argentina was Mercado Pago. And we're going to talk about what that means and why that is such a good signal for crypto and how it can really take off here in the next slide. En la próxima, por favor. So Mercado Pago and Mercado Libre. So Mercado Libre was an online like marketplace app where you could like buy furniture, buy clothes, buy literally anything, TVs. And it's widely used, and it started a decade ago here in Colombia. And the platform was doing so good that they were like, hey, fuck using other people's payment service, we should just use our own, because they were facing certain restrictions, right? Like, they could build something that was custom and that worked better for them, so they created this thing called Mercado Pago, which is like the payment system that they used, right? 10 years ago, it was created just to handle payments on this platform because they wanted to optimize for certain things that are specific to their platform. Now, a decade later, they've expanded to be a complete financial service. They offer like banks, they offer, let me just read it so I don't misquote. Financial services from payment processing and gateway services to mobile payments and credit cards. So they've completely like blown up from being this random like neobank thing that was just platform specific, like I think Shopify has something similar, to now being one of the largest payment infrastructures in Latin America and in Colombia specifically. Another example of kind of like community solving for hyperlocal problems and then seeing this crazy growth that for us as a crypto community is what we need to look to is PixPay in Brazil. So PixPay is the dominant mobile payment service in Brazil, and it handles like millions of dollars per day in transaction volume, and it's kind of like the preferred method for payments in Brazil. every day people are sending between each other, like for kind of like peer-to-peer stuff, but I think they can also use that to pay peer-to-business. I'm not sure, Victor is in here, but long story short, this also started as like, hey, what's an alternative to the financial system that we have now to empower our people and solve a hyper-local problem? That then became the #1 used thing in that country. Okay, and then, so now back to, like, that was a long way to kind of arrive to this point to say, like, how do we build international developer communities, and really what's the reason, what's the why? The why is, like, other places have problems, like I said, that we don't, and if we can empower developers to leverage the tools that we've built, to leverage the platforms that we've built to solve hyper-local problems, they can be the next PixPay, they can be the next Mercado Pago, but on crypto. And like I said, we kind of linked to different points of why they're kind of ripe for this type of environment, right? Like neobank, digital first, everyone has a cell phone. Not very many people, like not as many people have a laptop. So they kind of have all of these different conditions that makes them a really good opportunity for crypto to come and say, hey, we're gonna bring you the tools, we're gonna bring you the platforms, and then we're gonna build a developer community that knows the problems of the area, that understands the needs of the people, that understands the limitations of the technology that we're bringing, right? Because tech isn't like a one-size-fits-all, a layer 2, whatever you're building, it's not gonna work for everyone. So instead of us trying to build things for everyone and being like, oh, we're gonna build the next Mercado Pago as like Americans, really the better approach is to go build a developer community there. And how do you do that? El próximo, por favor. How do you do that? Translate developer docs to other languages. We have a bunch of barriers up right now where it's like everything is in English and we kind of just expect the world to like revolve around us. And I mean, and it's been fine up until this point, but really how much adoption have we gotten in Latin America from the developer side? Not very much compared to the US and Europe. Another way, grants programs specific to the regions. So if you set up ambassador programs and a pool of money specifically for this region and you say, we want to support you building hyper local solutions, obviously that's a great way combined with kind of developer docs translated in that language for developers to come and take advantage of this opportunity. Another way, basically what I said earlier is like, don't try to be the person that builds everything for everyone because we don't understand the problems of the region. Even me as someone Colombian born, I've lived in the United States for a long time. I don't understand the problems here enough to try to build something like that. Instead, you should go and create connections, go create these ambassador programs, go connect with people who are already working on these problems. And kind of the final thing is like, there's people who have been working on these problems for decades. And kind of one of the critiques that I hear about crypto that I agree with is we're like, oh, we're gonna solve everything. We're gonna solve homelessness. We're gonna solve the housing market. We're gonna solve like inflation. And there's teams who've been working on this literally for decades and decades and decades. And really what we should be doing is partnering with them and just giving them the tools to work on the stuff that they've been studying and working on for many years, long before we were here. El próximo, por favor. And the last slide is just a thank you slide where I link this post that I wrote called The Dead End of Eurocentric Crypto, where you can see all of my sources cited for kind of all the stats I gave and also read more long form about this specific topic. Y la próxima. And